There's a stretch of highway known as Ridgeway Pass, cutting through the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. Locals say it's cursed, a place where travelers vanish without a trace. The highway's reputation doesn't bother Kevin and Sarah, a couple heading to a weekend retreat in the mountains. Kevin, ever the skeptic, laughs off the warnings. Sarah, more cautious, keeps her concerns to herself. But as night falls and the trees grow thicker, the road seems to take on a life of its own. They left the main highway around dusk, following a GPS route that promised a shortcut. The road quickly became narrower, the pavement cracked and overgrown. Sarah frowned as the GPS recalculated for the third time. "Are you sure this is the right way?" she asked. Kevin shrugged. "It's what the map says. Don't worry, it'll save us at least an hour." But as they drove deeper into the woods, their signal faded, and the GPS lost its connection entirely. The shortcut had turned into a maze of twisting roads, with no signs to guide them. Kevin's confidence waned, though he tried to hide it. "We'll find our way back," he said, gripping the wheel tightly. Sarah wasn't so sure. The forest seemed alive, the trees leaning in as if to whisper secrets to one another. And then there was the mist, a strange glowing fog that clung to the ground, thickening as they went. Out of nowhere, a figure appeared on the side of the road. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered white dress, her face obscured by long, dark hair. Kevin hit the brakes, and the car skidded to a stop just feet from her. "What the hell?" Kevin muttered. Sarah's heart raced. What's she doing out here? The woman didn't move, didn't even flinch. She just stood there, her head slightly tilted, as if studying them. Against her better judgment, Sarah rolled down her window. "Do you need help?" she called out. The woman slowly lifted her head, revealing hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Her lips parted, and a single word escaped. "Leave." Kevin slammed on the gas, the car lurching forward as the woman disappeared into the fog behind them. Minutes turned into hours, and the road seemed to stretch endlessly. No matter how far they drove, they couldn't find an exit or a crossroad. The trees looked the same, their gnarled branches forming twisted shapes against the night sky. "We've been here before," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "That's the same tree we passed 20 minutes ago." Kevin didn't respond. He was too focused on the road, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. The car's headlights barely pierced the fog, which seemed to grow thicker with every mile. And then they saw it, a small gas station, its flickering neon sign cutting through the mist. Relief washed over them as Kevin pulled into the lot. The gas station was eerily silent, its windows dark and empty. Kevin got out to look around while Sarah stayed in the car, her unease growing. The place felt wrong, like it had been abandoned for years. Yet the pumps looked new, and the air smelled faintly of gasoline. Kevin returned a moment later, shaking his head. "No one's here, but there's a map on the wall. I think I can figure out where we are." As he studied the map, Sarah noticed movement in the rearview mirror. She turned to see the woman in white standing just a few feet away, her hollow eyes fixed on the car. "Kevin!" she screamed. He spun around, but the woman was gone. The fog pressed against the windows, swirling as if alive. "We need to go, now," Sarah said, her voice shaking. Kevin didn't argue. They sped away, the gas station disappearing into the mist behind them. Not long after leaving the gas station, they noticed headlights in the rearview mirror. At first, it was a relief. Another car meant they weren't alone. But the relief turned to dread as the vehicle drew closer, its headlights unnaturally bright. The car, if it was a car, didn't pass them. It stayed directly behind, tailgating so closely that Kevin could feel its presence like a weight. He tried to speed up, but the phantom vehicle matched their pace. And then it vanished. One moment, it was there, and the next, the road was empty. Just when they thought they couldn't take any more, they saw a light ahead. It wasn't another car or a gas station, but a small cabin nestled among the trees. Desperate and out of options, they decided to stop. The cabin looked old but well-maintained, with a warm light glowing in the window. Kevin knocked on the door, and after a moment, it creaked open to reveal an elderly man. "Lost, are you?" the man asked, his voice raspy. Kevin nodded. "Do you have a phone? Or any way to call for help?" The man shook his head. "No phone here. But you're welcome to stay the night. The road's no place to be after dark." Reluctantly, they agreed. The man showed them to a small bedroom, where they locked the door and tried to sleep. But the whispers began as soon as the lights went out. The whispers grew louder, forming words that sent chills down their spines. He's not what he seems. Get out. They're watching. Kevin and Sarah bolted from the room, only to find the cabin empty. The old man was gone, and the warm light had turned cold and blue. The walls seemed to close in, the whispers turning into screams. They fled into the night, finding their car miraculously parked just outside. But as they drove away, the cabin's light reappeared in the distance, no matter how far they went. Days later, their car was found on the side of Ridgway Pass, its doors wide open and the engine dead. Kevin and Sarah were never seen again. Locals say their ghosts now wander the highway, warning other travelers to stay away. And if you ever find yourself on Ridgway Pass, beware the fog, where it hides more than just the road ahead. The open highway stretched endlessly before them, the long asphalt ribbon illuminated by the dim glow of their car's headlights. Sarah and Tom were newlyweds on a cross-country road trip, taking the scenic route to visit her parents in a small town several states away. It was late, far later than they'd planned to drive, but the next motel was miles away, and they decided to push through the night. The road was eerily quiet, with no other cars in sight. Surrounding them were dense, dark woods on either side of the road, their shadows creeping like skeletal fingers over the edges of the pavement. Occasionally, the hum of their car was interrupted by the distant call of nocturnal animals or the whisper of the wind through the trees. As the night deepened, an oppressive sense of isolation began to settle over them. Neither of them realized that their journey would take a turn into something far more terrifying than a lonely stretch of highway. The first sign of trouble came just past midnight. The car's dashboard clock glowed faintly, marking 12:15 a.m., when Sarah noticed a figure standing by the side of the road. She nudged Tom, who was behind the wheel. "Tom, slow down. Look over there," she said, pointing ahead. The figure was a man wearing a tattered jacket and jeans. His face was obscured by shadows, but his posture seemed desperate. He stood in the middle of the lane, waving his arms frantically. Tom's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he slowed the car to a crawl. "Do you think he needs help?" Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice. "I don't know," Tom replied, "but it's not safe to stop in the middle of nowhere like this." As they approached, the man stepped closer to the car, his face briefly illuminated by the headlights. His eyes were wild, darting around as if he were being chased. He mouthed something, but the words were lost in the hum of the engine. Then, suddenly, he lunged toward the car, slamming his hands on the hood. "Drive!" Sarah screamed. Tom hit the gas and the car sped forward, forcing the man to jump out of the way. In the rearview mirror, Sarah watched him stumble and fall to the pavement before disappearing into the darkness. "What the hell was that about?" Tom said, his voice shaking. "I don't know," Sarah whispered, "but something's not right." They continued down the highway, the encounter leaving an uneasy silence between them. Sarah kept glancing in the side mirrors, half expecting to see the man chasing after them. But the road behind them remained empty. An hour passed, and just as they were beginning to relax, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. The lights were distant at first, but they grew closer with alarming speed. Tom frowned. "Finally, another car," he muttered. "Maybe we're not the only ones out here." But something about the approaching vehicle felt off. It was moving too fast, its headlights bobbing unnaturally, as if it were floating above the road. Within seconds, it was tailgating them, its blinding beams flooding their car's interior. "What is this guy doing?" Tom said, his irritation mounting. He tapped the brakes lightly to signal the driver to back off, but the car didn't budge. Instead, it swerved violently from side to side, as if trying to force them off the road. "Tom, slow down," Sarah urged. "Let him pass." Tom eased off the gas and moved to the shoulder, but the other car didn't pass. Instead, it stopped in the middle of the road, its headlights glaring like unblinking eyes. Tom and Sarah stared at the car in their rearview mirror, waiting for the driver to step out, but no one did. "This is insane," Tom muttered, putting the car in gear and pulling back onto the road. As they drove away, the other car remained motionless, its lights growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. By the time they spotted a flickering neon sign advertising a gas station, their nerves were frayed. The station was a small, run-down building surrounded by rusting pumps. It looked abandoned, but the lights inside suggested otherwise. "Let's stop here," Sarah said. "We need to get our bearings and maybe call someone." Tom pulled into the station and parked near the entrance. The air was heavy with the scent of gasoline and damp earth. Sarah stepped out of the car and stretched, her breath visible in the chilly night air. The attendant inside was an older man with a grizzled beard and tired eyes. He barely looked up as they entered. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice gravelly. Tom hesitated. "We had a strange encounter back on the highway. Some guy tried to stop us, and then another car, well, it was acting crazy." The attendant's expression darkened. "You're not the first to say that," he muttered. "This stretch of road, it's got a history. Accidents, disappearances, people seeing things that shouldn't be there." Sarah's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" The man shrugged. "Just stories. But if I were you, I'd get off this road as soon as possible." Back on the highway, the tension in the car was palpable. Sarah kept glancing out the window, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Tom focused on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. An hour passed and they hadn't seen another car or building. The highway seemed to stretch endlessly, an infinite loop of asphalt and shadows. Then, up ahead, they saw her, a woman standing by the side of the road, her long hair blowing in the wind. "Not again," Tom muttered. "Wait," Sarah said. "She looks normal. Maybe she needs help." Tom reluctantly slowed the car as they approached. The woman stepped closer, and for a moment she looked like any other stranded motorist. But as the headlights illuminated her face, Sarah gasped. The woman's eyes were hollow sockets, and her mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. She raised one hand, her fingers bent at unnatural angles, and pointed directly at them. Tom slammed on the gas, and the car lurched forward. As they sped away, Sarah turned to look back. The woman was gone, as if she'd never been there. Hours later, just as the first light of dawn began to break, they saw a sign for a town up ahead. Relieved, they followed the exit and found themselves in a quaint, picturesque village. The streets were lined with old-fashioned lampposts, and the buildings had a charming, vintage aesthetic. But as they drove deeper into the town, a chilling realization dawned on them. The streets were completely empty. There were no cars, no people, no signs of life. The only sound was the distant toll of a church bell, echoing eerily through the empty streets. "This doesn't feel right," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom nodded, his eyes darting around nervously. "Let's just keep driving. We'll find another way back to the highway." But no matter which direction they turned, the streets seemed to loop back on themselves. The town was a maze, trapping them within its borders. And then they saw it. The same woman from the highway, standing in the middle of the road, her hollow eyes fixed on them. Tom and Sarah's screams echoed through the empty. The highway stretched out before them, an endless ribbon of black cutting through the desolate expanse of the desert. It was Route 66, a road steeped in history and legends, some glorious, others sinister. For Jake and Mia, it was supposed to be just another stretch of their cross-country road trip. They'd set out from Los Angeles that morning, the sun high in the sky, and now, as night enveloped the landscape, they found themselves alone on the road. The plan was to drive until they reached the small town of Claymore, where they'd booked a cheap motel. But as the miles ticked by, the journey began to feel different. The air seemed heavier, the darkness thicker, and the road felt like it was leading them somewhere they weren't meant to go. It started with the fog. At first, it was a faint mist curling around the edges of the road, barely noticeable. But within minutes, it thickened, swallowing the headlights and reducing visibility to just a few feet. Jake slowed the car, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. "This wasn't in the forecast," Mia said, her voice tinged with unease. She checked her phone, but the screen displayed no service. "Great, just great." "It's fine," Jake said, though he didn't sound convinced. "It's just fog. We'll drive slow and get through it." But the fog wasn't ordinary. It seemed to move, shifting and curling in unnatural patterns, almost as if it were alive. Shapes appeared in the mist, dark silhouettes that seemed to watch them as they passed. Mia shivered and looked away, telling herself it was just her imagination. The first real scare came when they saw the hitchhiker. He appeared out of nowhere, standing at the edge of the road with his thumb outstretched. He was tall and gaunt, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Jake hesitated, his foot hovering over the brake. "Don't stop," Mia said quickly, a chill running down her spine. "What if he needs help?" Jake replied. "And what if he's a serial killer?" Jake sighed and drove past, glancing in the rearview mirror as they passed the man. But the hitchhiker didn't fade into the distance as they expected. Instead, he seemed to follow them, his figure growing larger in the mirror as if he were running after the car. Jake hit the gas, his heart pounding. When he glanced back again, the hitchhiker was gone. A few miles down the road, they spotted a faint glow ahead. It was an old gas station, its neon sign flickering weakly. Jake pulled in, hoping to get directions or at least a break from the oppressive fog. The station looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The pumps were rusted, and the windows were covered in grime. "Are you sure this place is open?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. "The lights are on," Jake replied. "Let's check it out." They stepped inside, the door creaking loudly as it swung open. The interior was dimly lit, with shelves of dusty, expired goods and a faint smell of mildew. Behind the counter stood an old man, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of a small desk lamp. "Evening," the man said, his voice gravely. "You two lost?" Jake nodded. "We're trying to get to Claymore. Do you know how far it is?" The man's expression darkened. "Claymore? You'd best turn around and head back the way you came." "Why?" Mia asked. The old man hesitated, then leaned closer. "There's things on this road you don't want to see. People who go looking for Claymore at night, they don't come back." Before Jake or Mia could respond, the lights flickered and the station was plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on, the old man was gone, and the door to the station stood wide open. Shaken, Jake and Mia got back in the car and drove away, the fog thicker than ever. Minutes later, Mia noticed something in the rearview mirror. "Jake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a car behind us." Jake glanced in the mirror. A pair of headlights shone in the distance, growing closer with alarming speed. "It's probably just another driver," he said, though his voice wavered. But the car didn't pass them. It stayed right on their tail, its high beams flooding the interior of their car with blinding light. Jake sped up, but the other car matched his pace, swerving erratically as if trying to force them off the road. "What do they want?" Mia cried. Jake didn't answer. He was too focused on the road ahead. Suddenly, the other car vanished, its headlights blinking out as if it had never been there. Mia's hands trembled as she clutched the seatbelt. As they drove deeper into the fog, strange whispers began to fill the car. At first, they were faint, almost inaudible, but soon they grew louder, overlapping voices that seemed to come from all around them. "Do you hear that?" Mia asked, her eyes wide with fear. Jake nodded, his jaw clenched. "It's just the wind," he said, though he didn't believe it. The voices grew louder, more insistent, until they could make out words. "Turn back. You don't belong here. They're coming." Jake gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles white. "We're almost there," he said, though he had no idea if it was true. Just as they were about to give up hope, they saw lights ahead. It was Claymore, or at least it seemed to be. The town was eerily quiet, its streets empty and its buildings dark. They pulled into the parking lot of the motel, its neon sign flickering like the gas stations had. Inside, the receptionist greeted them with a vacant smile. "Welcome," she said, her voice monotone. "We've been expecting you." Mia's stomach dropped. "What does she mean?" she whispered. Before Jake could answer, the lights flickered, and the receptionist was gone. The lobby was empty, the front door swinging open to reveal the fog rolling in. Jake and Mia fled the motel, their only thought to escape. But no matter which way they turned, the highway seemed to loop back on itself, leading them past the same landmarks over and over again. The voices returned, louder than ever, and the silhouettes in the fog grew closer, their shapes more distinct. Finally, their car sputtered to a stop, the engine dead. The headlights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Outside, the whispers became laughter, and the shadows closed in. Jake and Mia's car was found abandoned on Route 66 weeks later. There was no sign of them, only the faint imprint of footprints leading into the desert. Travelers on the highway still speak of them, warning others to avoid the road at night. And if you're ever driving Route 66 and see a pair of headlights in your rearview mirror, don't look. Thank you for watching. If this story sent chills down your spine, don't forget to leave a like and share it with others who love a good scare. Make sure to subscribe to Han Untold and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next creepy tale. Your support helps us keep uncovering the darkest and most haunting stories. Have a story you'd like us to cover? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the scariest things are closer than you think. Sweet dreams.